For decades, a dangerous military secret was buried beneath Rockport's abandoned lighthouse, hidden from the public who deserved the truth. Thomas Hale, a man willing to silence anyone who dared uncover it, became the shadow guarding that injustice. But Jack Mercer, driven by loyalty, sacrifice, and an unshakable sense of duty, risked everything to expose the secret. Just listen to how shocking the turn of events in this drama was, and why justice ultimately prevailed. Jack Mercer had never felt entirely at home since returning from service. At 38, his body bore the quiet marks of a life spent in the service of something greater, but his mind carried the weight of years he preferred not to revisit. Rockport, his coastal hometown, was quiet now, almost forgotten. A place of narrow docks, salt-worn piers, and the constant rhythm of the tide. Jack walked its shoreline daily, accompanied by Rex, his loyal German shepherd. Rex had been with him since the end of his last deployment, a steadfast presence in the long days when silence threatened to overwhelm him. It was one of those gray afternoons when the sky seemed heavy enough to hold its breath. Jack wandered farther along the coast than usual, boots sinking into wet sand, the cold wind tugging at the collar of his jacket. Rex padded beside him, his ears twitching at the sound of waves breaking against rocks. Then, without warning, Rex stopped. His body stiffened, and he turned toward the far edge of the bay, toward the silhouette of a lighthouse that had stood abandoned for decades. The old structure loomed against the darkening sky. Its white paint had long since peeled away, revealing rusted steel and weathered stone beneath. The glass windows on its upper level were fractured, some missing entirely. Local fishermen told stories about the place, whispers of a military scandal decades ago that led to its closure. Nobody dared step inside. It was a place sealed off from curiosity, left to rot against time and tide. But now Rex's low, insistent growl cut through the wind, anchoring Jack's attention. Something about the way the dog stared pulled at a deeper part of him, a part that thirsted for answers. Jack hesitated. Part of him wanted to walk away, to let the lighthouse remain a mystery. But there was something in Rex's stance, in his urgent gaze, that made Jack's heart tighten. The war had taken much from him, but it had also left him with a restless need to understand the world around him, to search where others turned away. This was no longer a walk along the shore. This was a call he could not ignore. He approached the base of the lighthouse, each step crunching on weathered gravel. A cold wind wrapped around him, carrying with it the sharp tang of salt and something older, harder to name. The heavy wooden door sagged on rusted hinges, yet with a push it gave way. Inside, dust floated in shafts of light falling through broken windows. The air smelled of sea spray, rust, and something metallic. Jack's boots echoed softly on stone steps as he descended into the basement. The space was a tangle of shadows and forgotten things, shattered glass, corroded tools, fragments of equipment long abandoned. Then, in the far corner beneath a collapsed beam, something caught his eye. A large, heavy chest, sealed and weathered, its surface scarred by decades of neglect. Strange numbers were stamped across it, symbols that made no immediate sense. The chest was unlike anything Jack had seen before, and a strange weight settled in his chest, not just from its physical presence, but from the sense that it belonged to something hidden, something important. He knelt beside it, brushing away dust and debris with careful hands. The hinges groaned under his touch, and a chill ran through him. His eyes scanned the surface again, lingering on the mysterious numbers. Who had brought this here? And why had it been left to sit in silence for so many years? Rex pressed close to his side, head tilted, ears alert. Jack could almost hear the dog's thoughts. This is something worth knowing. A wave of curiosity mixed with unease washed over Jack. He had no way of knowing that opening this door would pull him into a chain of events far larger than himself, events that would uncover secrets meant to remain buried. But right now, all he knew was this: the lighthouse had called him, and he had answered. Jack's hands trembled as he braced himself against the weight of the chest. The metal was cold and rough beneath his palms, its surface pitted with rust and etched with numbers that seemed more like a code than anything else. Every instinct screamed that what lay inside would change something, though what he could not yet name. He took a breath and forced the latch open. The hinges groaned as if protesting decades of silence, and the air that escaped smelled of oil, salt, and something faintly metallic, like blood in memory. Inside, layers of aged paper, leather-bound volumes, and carefully stacked objects greeted him. His pulse quickened. At first, it seemed like the chest contained fragments of forgotten history. There were stacks of documents yellowed with age, maps of the coastline marked with strange symbols, and folders stamped with insignias Jack recognized from old military photos. Among them lay several compact metal cases. Their surfaces were engraved with symbols that Jack knew belonged to classified military divisions, divisions long erased from public record. His fingers lingered over a folded set of blueprints, their edges brittle, the diagrams hinting at equipment far advanced for the time they were made. But then he found it. A faded leather journal, the cover cracked and worn, its edges curling like leaves in wind. The handwriting was neat but strained, as if written under pressure. Jack read aloud in a low voice, scanning the first lines. This lighthouse was no ordinary beacon. It was a node in a larger network, a covert station during the Cold War. Technology here was designed to control communications along the entire coastline. The files must be sealed. The truth must never be known. Jack's heart hammered. His breath caught. The lighthouse had been far more than a neglected relic. It had been a living part of something dangerous. The journal was heavier with implications. Leafing through it, Jack found references to a project codenamed Aegis Signal. According to the entries, it involved experiments with electromagnetic waves capable of interfering with communications across vast distances. But the later pages hinted at something far darker, experiments that went beyond signals. Experiments that tested control over minds and memories. The author wrote of cover-ups and orders given by officials who feared the truth. Jack closed the journal slowly, a cold weight settling in his chest. His mind raced. This wasn't just old military equipment. This was proof of a cover-up so deep it had been buried for decades, possibly still active in some way. The implications were terrifying. And then the sound came. It was soft at first, almost drowned out by the wind and the roar of waves above. But it grew, footsteps, deliberate and slow, echoing through the stone walls of the lighthouse. Jack froze. His breath went tight in his chest. He glanced toward the stairs, toward the faint light spilling down from above. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed, thick and oppressive. Then a voice, low, controlled, but carrying a sharp edge. Curiosity can be dangerous, Mercer. Jack spun toward the sound. Standing in the doorway was a tall man in a dark jacket, his face shadowed but his expression calm, almost smug. He looked like someone who had been expecting this moment. His gaze swept over Jack and the chest as if reading a script. "Thomas Hale," Jack said quietly, recognition dawning. Hale was a local contractor, known for military contracts, a man whose name had surfaced quietly in rumors but never in the light of proof. Hale smirked. "I guess curiosity brought you here, Mercer," Hale said, stepping closer, boots crunching softly on the stone floor. "But you shouldn't have." The words hung in the air like a warning. Jack's mind raced, the journal's revelations pounding in his head. This was no longer about an abandoned lighthouse. This was about something much larger, something Hale clearly wanted to keep buried forever. Jack looked back at the chest. Its contents were no longer just history. They were a danger, and he knew, without doubt, that opening this door had changed everything. Jack stood frozen for a moment, the weight of Hale's words sinking in. The chest at his feet seemed heavier now, not just in body, but in consequence. Hale's calm voice was a warning, but Jack heard it as a threat. It was more than a warning to stay away. It was a promise. If Jack spoke of this, something irreparable would happen. Something inside him shifted. Years of service in far-off deserts, of watching things buried in silence, surged forward in a wave of indignation. Hale was not just guarding an abandoned lighthouse. He was protecting a secret that had been deliberately hidden from the world. That secrecy was an injustice. Decades of lies, experiments conducted without consent, information locked away from those who had the right to know. Jack's anger rose. It wasn't fear that gripped him now. It was outrage. He thought of Rex, sitting at his side, his loyal presence a silent reminder of trust and duty. He thought of his own years of sacrifice, of nights when he'd risked everything for a cause greater than himself. And he thought of Rockport, the small town that trusted its history, unaware that beneath the lighthouse lay a buried truth. That truth had been stolen from them all. Jack's breath tightened, and he looked up at Hale. "You can't stop this," he said quietly, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "People deserve to know what's in here." Hale's smirk deepened, his posture calm but deliberate. "You don't understand, Mercer. Some truths are dangerous. You can't just open them and walk away." His words carried a weight of certainty, as if he had spent years building walls to keep this secret intact. But to Jack, they sounded like an admission. Anger hardened into resolve. He could not let Hale's threats silence him. If Hale was willing to guard this secret at any cost, then it must be even more important than Jack had realized, and that made it all the more vital that the world knew. Under the cover of darkness, Jack made his move. He waited until Hale had disappeared into the shadows outside the lighthouse, the sound of retreating footsteps swallowed by wind and tide. Then, with careful hands, he secured the chest with straps and pulled it toward the shoreline. Every step was calculated, every movement driven by the fierce determination burning inside him. Rex padded quietly beside him, his senses alert. The town lay in muted silence, broken only by the sound of water lapping against the rocks. Jack moved through the night, guided by instinct and necessity, until he found an abandoned boathouse tucked behind the weathered docks. Its door sagged on rusted hinges, but it offered the perfect refuge. Inside, Jack set the chest down. The air smelled of salt and old wood, and the dim light from a broken lantern revealed dust drifting in slow motion. He looked at the chest again, his jaw tightening. Hale's threat rang in his ears, but Jack was past the point of retreat. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the truth, and about justice. For a long moment, Jack sat beside the chest, fingers brushing the cold metal. He thought about Hale's smile, about the decades of silence that had protected this secret, and about what it meant for the people of Rockport and beyond. His anger had transformed into something sharper, determination. He would not allow Hale to bury the truth again. The lighthouse had been silent for too long, but Jack knew its voice was waiting to be heard. And now, with the chest hidden where he could guard it, Jack made a promise to himself. He would expose what lay inside. This was no longer just curiosity. This was a fight. Jack looked out toward the sea, where the lighthouse stood dark against the horizon. Somewhere inside its ruined walls lay answers, and somewhere in his heart lay the certainty that he was ready to face whatever came next. Jack had no illusions about what he was about to do. The chest he had hidden in the boathouse was not just a relic of the past. It was a burden, a truth that carried the weight of decades. Hale's threat still echoed in his mind, but Jack had already crossed the line. He was committed now. He could not turn back. He reached out to someone he trusted most, Marcus Flynn, an old war buddy and now an investigative journalist. Marcus was the kind of man who saw beyond the obvious, who understood that stories could change the world. When Jack explained what he had found, Marcus did not hesitate. They worked quietly, going over the chest's contents together, deciphering the faded journal, the maps, and the documents marked with strange codes. Each page they uncovered revealed a deeper layer of the truth. The lighthouse had not simply been an abandoned building. It had been a secret hub of a military project, a station designed to control information with a shadowy history of experiments the public was never told about. Hale's name surfaced repeatedly in the documents, a man who had been involved at every level of concealment. Jack felt the familiar knot of resolve tighten in his chest. This was not something he could keep to himself. Working through nights lit only by desk lamps and coffee, Jack and Marcus compiled everything. The story began to take shape. Documents, photos, journal entries, and maps, all pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a decades-old cover-up. Marcus arranged to publish it in a major national outlet. When the story went live, it exploded. Headlines filled news feeds across the country. Abandoned Lighthouse hides Cold War secrets. Military cover-up exposed. Public outrage was swift. Hale became a man pursued by questions. Authorities launched investigations. Hale disappeared before anyone could reach him, becoming the subject of an FBI search. His fate remained unknown, but his silence was confirmation enough that Jack and Marcus had unearthed something enormous. Jack didn't watch the storm of headlines with pride or desire for recognition. He watched quietly, standing at the edge of the cliff beside the lighthouse where it all began. Rex sat faithfully at his side, ears twitching in the sea breeze. Below them, waves broke against the rocks with steady rhythm. The lighthouse, scarred by years of neglect, stood like a sentinel over the truth now revealed. Jack drew a deep breath, feeling a heavy weight lift from his shoulders. For years, he had carried burdens too complicated to speak aloud, ghosts of service, loss, and silence. Now the truth was out. Hale was gone, the public knew, and the shadow that had haunted this place had been broken. It wasn't about glory for Jack. It wasn't about headlines or thanks. It was about justice. It was about closure for himself, for Rockport, and for everyone who had unknowingly lived under the shadow of that lighthouse. He had fought once for his country, and now he had fought again for truth. He looked down at Rex, whose eyes seemed to understand without words. They stood together in quiet, two survivors of a war they had each fought in their own way. Around them, the wind carried the sound of the sea, steady and unbroken. Jack turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun began to break through the clouds. For the first time in years, he felt peace. The lighthouse no longer held only secrets. It held proof that courage could still pierce decades of silence. And Jack knew that somewhere in the unfolding of this truth, there was healing. The lighthouse stood still, its broken frame etched against the morning sky. Where there had once been silence, now there was proof. Proof that even those who had been broken by war could still stand for something greater. The waves kept crashing, but Jack and Rex stayed on the cliff, watching. For them, the battle was over, and the truth was free.